Detective Sergeant John Marshall sat sipping coffee at his girlfriend's kitchen table. His open bathrobe revealed the muscular long legs of a former wide receiver. He wasn't home to answer his parents' phone call or to hear them pester him again about introducing them to Veronica. Every Sunday of his adult life, John had gotten a phone call from his mother to invite him out to lunch. She had long given up on getting him to church. "Don't worry," Veronica had once joked. "I aim to get you back in the habit one of these days if we ever legitimize this thing." John smiled at the memory of her slip of the tongue. They both knew she was the one more hesitant than he was about the prospects of getting married. He was happy to give her the time that she wanted, given what was going on at work. The best thing about being on the job by far was meeting the prosecutor, his coffee cup he held in his hands. At age 33, Detective Sergeant John Marshall was about to finish his 10th year in the Beau Reve Police Department. He figured it was as good a time as any to move out of homicide. Running a homicide squad was supposed to have given him a coveted vantage point in the department. Delving into the inner workings of the most complex, challenging aspects of police work would position him for his next move upward in the BRPD. Little did he know what the view would be from homicide. He knew he'd see dead bodies. He knew he'd be dealing with murderers. Nothing could have prepared him, though, for the nightmares. He didn't dream about bad guys. His nightmares were about things left undone. He dreamed of documents, paperwork filled out by a third grader's cursive, his own handwriting from years gone by. There were blank spaces on the page, too, presented to him while testifying in court by some faceless defense attorney during a thundering cross-examination. "Answer the question, Sergeant." The lawyer's roar never failed to wake him. Or was the accuser a professor of some sort? John could never quite picture it in the light of day, the mockery of his work that so terrified him at night. Some of the old-timers were beginning to talk about how the murder rate was creeping up, how it reminded them of the crack epidemic of the late 1980s. He did not want to stay in homicide, not with another crime wave looming. Since the Pruitt case, he was not altogether sure he still wanted to be on the force. John shuddered at the mere thought of Anton Pruitt's name. Who started it? Newly minted robbery detective Sergeant John Marshall had flashed his badge and looked into each middle schooler's face. The answer he received from the half-dozen witnesses was unanimous. "I didn't see nothing." As the yellow bus approached, he managed to get both fighters' names. He promised to revisit them, which he did, once. Anton Pruitt had been 13 years old on the day of the fist fight. Should have arrested them both on the spot. 2 years later, Pruitt shot a woman through the driver's side window of her car in front of her 4-year-old child. The gunman hadn't noticed the back seat when he singled out his carjacking victim. Pruitt then left the car, left the mother and the child, and left his fingerprints all over the door handle. After apprehending him, it took only an hour for John to trap him into a confession. "We have a witness." Pruitt had stared at John until the detective's meaning dawned on him. "You mean the baby in the back? Lord, that boy probably can't even..." Pruitt realized his mistake. "How was I supposed to know there was a kid in the back? That lady just kept screaming and screaming. I just wanted her to stop screaming." With the help of ballistics, prints, and a confession, homicide detective John Marshall sent the teenager to adult prison for attempted murder. By some miracle, the mother lived. John shook away the memory. Nearly half of his suspects were kids, teenagers who could have been outside playing, riding bikes, washing cars, like he did when he was young. Instead, they were busy committing violence against other human beings. On top of it all, he found lying to the police came as easily as breathing. Marshall looked up as Veronica, freshly dressed and showered, walked into the kitchen. "What's wrong?" she asked. She read the stress in his face. "Nothing that seeing you doesn't completely erase." "Huh, I don't believe that. When you quit that godforsaken job." "I don't know why you stay." "Sure you do." "Oh yes, I know. You're an upstanding black man who has the need to give back. But John, if you're not careful, the only thing you're going to give back to is an early grave." Am I going to get the whole sermon this morning? No, I'll spare you. Just for today, only because I want to get to Shimmer Springs before lunchtime. It's beautiful outside. It's beautiful right here, too. He turned, allowing his eyes to linger as he took in the vision of her. I am so going to marry this woman. He picked up his beaker, kissed Veronica on the lips, and headed for the shower. In the next chapter, we were introduced to Jason Royals, the 15-year-old boy in chapter 1. We go to John Marshall, and so Jason is walking from his home on a Sunday morning. He's going to see a girl about a job. It's chapter 3, it's called Presentable. As Jason made his way down College Boulevard, thoughts of Kim quickened his pace. He finally got her phone number Friday when he saw her at Oakwood. He was heading to the cafeteria. She was returning to class from the senior patio. An older woman, yeah, a man's got to keep his options open. Job or no job, he'd definitely be talking to Kim. Meanwhile, connecting with the pharmacy made him think of something his father always said. It's not what you know, it's who you know. Although Jason had heard it all his life, he finally understood it wasn't merely a complaint about the white old boy network. Knowing people like Kim could help him, too. Strolling past a stand of trees and then crossing under the overpass, he noticed a church bus careening down the interstate off-ramp. A few blocks ahead, on College Boulevard, Burger King beckoned him. He debated whether to stop and buy a Coke, ultimately deciding he would. Even though he was dressed to impress, he would not take the time to ask Burger King for a job application because Kim was waiting. Jason smiled, remembering her Wellstein's uniform, navy blue, logo-embellished golf shirt. He dressed accordingly, in khaki pants and a polo shirt, tucked in with a belt. Presentable, his mother called it. He and his brother had other words for it. Dad-proof. Their dad liked to enforce his own dress code, both inside and outside of his classroom. He had often walked up to boys Jason's own age in public and said, "Young man, your pants are falling down," or "your drawers are showing." Each time it happened, Jason felt his blood run cold. He wished he could disappear whenever his dad embarrassed him in public, but all he could do was turn, walk a few steps away, pretending he hadn't heard what his father said. Wherever they went, the doctor's office, the mall, Alvin pointed out to his boys the difference between respectable people and those he called the rest. The rest were audible from a mile away, kids goofing off in packs like the whole world revolved around them because their father surmised they had too much time on their hands. Respect is not a currency that grows on trees, boys, and as young black men, you will have to work at least twice as hard to earn it. Your thoughts beget your words and actions. Enfranchisement begins in your mind. Enfranchisement. Jason almost uttered the word aloud as the rhythm of each syllable carried him down College Boulevard. Enfranchisement, enfranchisement. Enfranchise was his father's shorthand for a productive, hardworking, law-abiding citizen. If you're not enfranchised, Alvin always said, then you're hanging out in the margins. His sons knew their father had no patience for people who were hanging out in the margins. Alvin had grown up in a different time, before the resurgence of hip-hop music, before cable TV, before the internet. He grew up in a time when people fantasized about the year 2000, but he was slow to embrace the brand new century. While Alvin still bought his music in stores, Joey Sullivan next door was using Napster to download anything he wanted to hear. Alvin warned the boys he thought the practice of burning CDs was illegal, but they paid him no heed. The man still read the newspaper, in print, every morning. And only 2 years before, in 1999, had he begun carrying his cell phone. He rarely remembered to turn it on. Jason borrowed his dad's cell phone sometimes, but what he really wanted was to get one of his own on his own so that he wouldn't have to count for minutes. Cell. Phone. Jason marched to the cadence in his head. His pace slowed when a flash of movement caught his eye. A block ahead, in front of the Burger King, a great egret was traversing the ditch. Its spindly black legs stepped gingerly across the dry culvert. Mama would love you. You're a beauty. Puzzled, Jason stopped and looked around, wondering where the nearest pond or creek might be, where the fisher bird might have come from. He spotted the patch of woods behind him, near the interstate. Maybe there? Looking at the bird again, he said, "You won't find any fish here." The egret paused and eyed Jason as if it had heard him and understood him. Unfolding its giant wings, it launched into flight, two long white flags undulating against the sapphire sky. Shading his eyes as he looked up, Jason watched the egret fade out of sight. "You are my beloved." Jason tried to remember the words his mother always said when she caught sight of a glorious winged creature. He'd ask her later. Kim was waiting. Eyes on the prize, he reminded himself. Eyes. Prize. Eyes.